All right, greetings again. This is Todd Carlson. I'll be moderating the webinar today. We've got quite a number of people that are joining as I'm speaking, so I'm going to give everyone just about another 30 seconds and we'll get started. All right. Again, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world. My name is Todd Carlson. I'm the VP of Healthcare Strategy for Snowflake. Welcome to today's webinar, Snowflake plus Healthgrades, creating meaningful connections between patients and providers. Just to kind of walk through some logistics. You have the ability via this platform to ask questions. Please, you can ask questions throughout the webinar, but understand we'll be answering those questions at the end. This is going to be recorded, and so you'll get a email with the attached recording tomorrow. Also know that you have access to a resources page, which has more information about Healthgrades and Snowflake. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So joining me today is Brian Stockmoe. He's the Vice President of System Engineering and Analytics with Healthgrades, and Jason Stitt, Principal Engineer, Data Engineering with Healthgrades. So they'll be doing the majority of the talking throughout all this. I'll just kind of give you a quick little overview. Brian and Jason will talk about what Healthgrades have done with Snowflake as part of their architecture. What I'll do with webinars like this, we never know from an audience perspective, what the level of knowledge is about Snowflake. So I'm sure a few people out there don't have any. So really quickly, Snowflake is a cloud data platform. If you look at the screen there, you'll notice it is cloud agnostic. We run on all three clouds, public clouds. We only run on public clouds. We are a database as a service, platform as a service, that basically, in essence, separates compute and storage. Your storage layer is any one of your cloud storage layers, such as Amazon AWS S3, Azure Blob Storage, and Google Cloud Storage. And then you'll notice there's a separate compute layer that sits above the storage, allows you to have independent compute nodes running on top of the data. And then you'll notice a global services layer, which basically makes what Snowflake is a service. It is not something that our clients have to manage themselves. So for the updating and the management of the database and managing ACID compliance from a transaction perspective, we manage the security and then also data sharing. So that's just a very, very quick, very high-level overview of what Snowflake is, but want to just provide that before we kind of jump in to the rest of the webinar. And this is where I'm going to pass it over to Brian and Jason, and I'll let the gentlemen introduce themselves and take it from here.
Great, thank you. This is Brian Stockmoe. As Todd said, I'm the Vice President of System Engineering and Analytics. So I have the teams here at Healthgrades that run our platform services, both in the cloud and on-prem. This webinar is primarily focused on our cloud platform around our products and our enterprise data platform. And then I've also am responsible for our client-facing analytics, as well as our internal product and management analytics that we use to be able to basically run our business.
Hi, this is Jason Stitt. Been working in various technical roles at Healthgrades for over 4 years, and currently work on our enterprise data platform. Been working with Snowflake specifically for almost 2 years, and I'm glad to be here.
Great. So what we're going to talk to you about today is a little bit about what Healthgrades does, a couple of our primary applications that we use in our go-to-market, and then the majority of the focus will be on our enterprise data platform and how we use that in Snowflake to enable those applications. Next there. So as it says, Healthgrades is in the business of connecting patients, people with providers and doctors. And we kind of think about this in two ways. So one is the consumer journey, thinking about when does someone need to talk to a doctor, and then how do we help them find the best match for them. And you'll see later on in the presentation some of the things we do both around our consumer-facing website, healthgrades.com, as well as our Healthgrades campaign management and CRM platform to help make that match as accurately as possible and as quickly as possible to help the patient get the care that they need, and then ultimately get them in to see the doctor or into the hospital itself. From a health system perspective, their perspective is really about how do they motivate people, both for prevention and their immediate care needs, to connect with them. And again, they're interested in making the right connections and getting the patient or the person the care as quickly as possible and the best care. And then last but not least, this is, I think, an emerging trend in healthcare as it's become more consumerized and more consumer focused, is how do they continue that relationship going forward. Next. So the first application we were going to talk about is part of what we call our acquisition solutions. So as I mentioned, we have healthgrades.com. That's our consumer-facing platform that will allow people to be able to search based on a variety of different things, such as market area, service, specialty of the type of the provider. Is also based on enrichments that we do around quality ratings and feedback. As part of that, we also provide what's called online scheduling. So once someone lands on a provider listing that they're interested in, we have the ability to offer them immediate online appointment scheduling. And that can be integrated both with the provider's website or directly through Healthgrades. And the advantage we've seen here is that we've been able to basically guarantee the providers at least 3.5, appointments a month, which may not sound like a lot, but if you think about it in the long-term journey, new patient acquisition is very expensive, and it gives them a good return on investment there, and it also increases the number of relationships that they have, so it helps them grow their practice over time. You'll also see that there's been an increase in online scheduling, and again, that's a convenience thing. We find that a lot of times the patient or the person really doesn't have the time or is not clear on how best to schedule, so this gives them a direct conduit into that. And then probably most importantly is through this, we're able to capture over 60% of non-business hour appointments. So if you think about the times when you've had to call and it's after hours and you leave a voicemail and you play phone tag, through this mechanism, we're able to actually book them directly, and so they can get in very quickly. The second application is what we call our CRM, Customer Relationship Management. And this is a very healthcare provider-specific CRM. It's one of our strategic products that's highly targeted, highly customized for healthcare providers. Unlike, say, a generic CRM that is used in general campaign management. And what we've done is we've built a series of capabilities as part of this that allow the providers to be able to run what we call omnichannel campaigns. And so we're able to help them design a campaign, and then using some of the capabilities that I'll talk about in a minute, be able to configure that campaign for the best return on investment. Starting with our data platform, and we'll talk more about this in the coming slides, which we call our enterprise data platform. It was very important that this be the foundation. Part of the thinking here was that it needed to be cloud-based so that we have very good scalability and performance. I think from a data model perspective, having a healthcare-specific data model, one that's very optimized for providers and the combination of marketing is very unique. That's a combination that hasn't existed previously. As you know, in healthcare, security is a very, very high priority. So being HITRUST certified, which tends to also satisfy other requirements for PII and HIPAA, as well as so that we can meet the obligations of our BAA, that our business associate agreement that we provide to our clients, and basically certifying that we are safeguarding their data. And then flexibility, and Jason's going to talk in a few minutes about the capabilities and the layers of capabilities, but the flexibility to be able to ingest, process, and then consume. In the AI model, we have a lot of proprietary AI and machine learning models that have been optimized, again, for audience targeting based on patient profiling, clinical propensity models, so we can understand what type of care someone might need when we're thinking about which services to promote and where. And then also risk prediction, so looking at where a particular person or patient may have risks of different healthcare needs. And more importantly, being able to use that interactively to be able to build the campaign and do the targeting. The BI reporting and analytics is the feedback loop. That's a near real-time capability, and it basically allows the marketers to be able to mine opportunities as well as use the feedback from the ongoing campaigns to be able to refine their campaigns and improve ROI. And then last is the marketing automation, which is a large portion of this that allows us to orchestrate, once they've been defined, the campaigns, to be able to do things like what's called multi-stage, hyper-targeted segments, and be able to do that flexibly. In previous incarnations, this has required a lot of resources to be able to implement. Our platform allows marketers to be able to do a lot of this as a self-service model, so they can interact with the data and the campaigns in near real time, and also get feedback through the different marketing automations. And we also gives us the ability, going back to the open connectedness of the platform, to be able to work with best-of-breed marketing automation providers, either that we engage with directly or that our clients utilize. So this is just a quick example of the Market Insights dashboard for a campaign that we're running against service lines. So think of service lines as things that the provider provides: cardiology, orthopedics, et cetera. And basically you can see the data that we're able to collect as we're running through the campaign here in terms of touch penetration on patients, numbers of visits that have been generated, visits per patient, what the year-over-year growth is, and then overall revenue per visit. And then we provide them various different visualizations to look across all of the different services to see which ones are performing better or worse. This is just a set of benchmarks to give you an idea of the types of campaigns we've run, and then what we've accomplished in ROI, basically being gross margin versus cost. So the average ROI we target is 3-to-1 minimum, and that's specific to each of the service lines. So you can see pretty good range here. Some service lines more successful than others. And then the overall average ROI is what was accomplished with this service line as a mix with all other service lines. Typically in the industry, most people right now focus on the average goal by service. So now we'll talk about our enterprise data platform, which is really the engine behind all of this. The grounding philosophy when we thought about the architecture and the design and the approach was that we wanted something that was multi-tenant, and we wanted to look at it as a set of capabilities. As part of that, we thought about core characteristics. Those tend to be a lot of your operating best practices. I won't read those to you. They're pretty self-explanatory. And then a set of technical capabilities in terms of what we needed to enable the ingesting, the processing, the storing, the aggregation, and the consumption of data, both from our clients, enrichments that we generate, as well as third parties. And then last was really the core of the data model itself, and being able to build standardized profiles of people. We have around 300 million people in our database, which is a combination of public data as well as data that we collect from our various clients. We do firewall that, so it's completely secure. We do not share that between clients, which is a big HIPAA no-no and part of our high trust certification. Provider data, and then the facility data is specific to the doctor's locations and the hospital locations, as you might expect. That's important when we're doing matching and then helping people to be able to connect. And then the self-service analytics and API, the analytics being the feedback loop, and we'll talk more about how that works, and then the API layer for consuming through a variety of ways. So I'm going to hand off to Jason. He's going to talk to you a little more about the architecture and some of the specifics around the flow, and then where Snowflake fits in.
Sure, glad to, Brian. So what this is showing you is really where we've positioned Snowflake in the overall stack here, both in terms of kind of the technical side and the product side, which, as you can see, is fairly central. To give some context, what we've done in the past here was largely oriented around product-specific data marts, and what we're building now with what we call the Enterprise Data Platform is more of a warehouse. And we're using Snowflake as both the source of truth store in the middle of our reusable data assets, as well as some of the product-specific marts or consumption databases that are being built off of that. So we have ingestion happening from multiple sources of data, some of which are large batches, some of which are small batches, some of which are individual message and event-driven data sources. We're pulling all of those different sources together. We're ingesting data into our source of truth in Snowflake in essentially as we get it. So rather than only doing larger occasional batches, whether we get a batch or whether we get an individual message, we're pulling that in at least into the initial stage and source of truth data as we get it in a largely streaming fashion. Then after that, we have a number of different product-specific layers as needed by different software or different teams, some of which are also in Snowflake through views or just through different generated data models, some of which are ETL from Snowflake into something else. So you can kind of get a picture of how we're using this to A, tie together the ecosystem, and B, to do real or near real-time ingestion of data as opposed to more of a batch load or a flip type of process. And so it's definitely been part of our overall strategy to build something that for our enterprise data platform was cloud native end-to-end, both the infrastructure that we've built and also obviously the Snowflake part of that as well.
So I'm just going to talk a few minutes about why did we choose Snowflake to enable EDP. So I think Jason alluded to a few of these, but in terms of business needs to be able to accomplish our strategy, we needed to be able to support the multiple products off a single enterprise because, again, all of our different products use those common profiles. Two is we needed the flexibility, scalability, and performance. We did look at Redshift because we do host everything on Amazon, and we felt like Snowflake gave us a little bit more flexibility in terms of being able to manage our resources, in terms of data structures and flexibility on how we share data, as well as how we manage our clustering. And we're able to dynamically adjust that based on SLAs we have for ingest of large volumes of data, as well as the transformations that we do in the serving up of the analytics.
Yeah, so that's a good point, and that's very personally relevant to me, being on the software and data engineering side here. So, to make that, I want to make that a little bit more concrete in terms of some of the use cases here. If I have, some kind of steady state workflow or workload that I have capacity for in, some kind of traditional clustered solution, I want to add another substantial workload to that. Or someone has given me, some terabytes of JSON data for some ad hoc analysis, something of that nature, either, temporary or permanent workload. I might start the discussion in terms of, capacity, and, might have to talk to Brian and you say, well, what do you need? What's it going to cost? How long are you going to need to leave it up for? If we need to take an existing cluster and increase the size, are there implications to that, depending on technology, obviously, for resharding or data migration or anything of that nature? The way the conversation goes with our current architecture is really just more oriented around the data. You saw in the early slide, depending on a little familiar with Snowflake. So the actual data itself is in cloud object storage, where we're not really concerned about size of disk. and the compute and memory capacity is dynamic. So, Brian's not asking me how long do you need to leave this cluster up for. And because of the separation of compute and storage, we're also not having a conversation about having to reshard, reload, or anything of that nature. So it makes that part of the conversation much more abbreviated and more just based on, well, what do you need, what's the data, and what are we going to do with it when? So that's kind of the more concrete version of kind of where this came in.
Thanks, Jason. And then I'm going to keep hammering at security again for all the healthcare folks. I think you're acutely aware of the risks and how that's has become strategic for the business. So again, we like the security, the role-based access. We'll talk a little bit about data sharing, but ways that we can share the data easily, but still maintain the security controls. Performance, which Jason just talked to. And the make available is not just for consumers, but engineers. So, it's much easier for our folks on the platform team and for the folks developing to be able to do what they need to do in a very simple way, because the data is consolidated and because there's a lot of flexibility in how you define your data in your warehouses. And I think we've talked about a few of the pain points, but although we had a very successful business, there was a lot of extra work going on behind the scenes to make it run, both on the infrastructure and engineering side as well as the services team. And that was a result of the legacy data having been fragmented and siloed from when it started up. We had performance challenges, and again, because of the lack of flexibility, it was very time consuming and slow to scale. High concurrency could be a problem, so we had to do a lot of workload refactoring, but was not very efficient. And then, because the environment was somewhat fragmented and required that we dedicate isolated resources to clients, it was fairly complex to maintain security across all those different instances. So if you look to the right, that's basically our logical flow that we were thinking about when we were considering these things. And Jason will do a deeper dive in the next slide, but essentially you could think about, again, client data, enriched data, third-party data coming in, and then the desire to have it land in a warehouse, and then within the warehouse have the ability to create purpose-built data stores and data marts, if you will, that could be used by the various applications and processes, as well as to serve it up to the consumption layer. So the value, pretty straightforward here, gives us that ability to ingest and transform. Having a SaaS platform, much easier to run, and having one that is certified by a BA goes a long ways for us to meet our requirements and our commitments to our clients for our BA. And then again, just keep hammering the flexibility around multiple warehouses, the access control, the data structures, data sharing capabilities, and then, as Jason described, our ability to match capacity to demand efficiently. So I'm going to hand it back to Jason. He's just going to give you a little bit more detail on what happens here within that logical flow.
Sure. So as we said, we take in data from multiple sources. Generally, our approach is to prefer streaming on the input side. So if we get a flat file, we break it apart into rows, or even putting it into a streaming queue. And then as we move all of that data through, there comes a time when we want to get all of that in the most efficient possible way into our Snowflake database, into our stage. And so coming from the left here, you can see we've got some buckets there. And so we're putting that data into microbatches in our object store, we use S3. And so from there, we're loading in using Snowpipe. So we were a relatively, I think, early-ish adopter of the Snowpipe REST API. And we've been using it for quite some time to load the vast majority of our input data in a event-driven fashion as soon as that data is available. So as soon as the object lands in the bucket, there's an event being triggered. We're doing some routing on our side in the event handler to say where exactly that goes, because we have numerous different types of data input. And then as soon as possible, that data is making it directly into our staging tables. in a very event-driven way, then we are, moving that data along. Obviously, there's some additional transformations that can happen both into our ultimate source of truth and into any other kind of marts that we prepare for other usages, such as BI, such as moving some of the data out into Elasticsearch for a specific application search use case, such as performing enrichments. So I want to tie a couple things together here on that side. So Brian mentioned that one of the things we do here is we add propensity models or risk scores to the data that we make available to our customers, and we're actually scoring several hundred individual risk models on most persons in the U.S., grouped into categories, obviously, for usability. Those were developed in-house by our data science team at Healthgrades, and that's an out-of-database process. So it's a machine learning tool that uses some scored models that were developed internally. And what we're able to do there is, again, go back to our object storage in our account and very easily and very quickly unload data in CSV or JSON process, and then load back from the same location right back into database. So it gives us a nice cycle time. We can potentially perform those enrichments depending on how many people need to be scored in a few minutes round trip. So that gives you some idea, obviously fairly high level, but some idea of how data is flowing through, how there's an interaction between our cloud storage and our Snowflake SQL database, and some of the things we're doing.
So we just put a basic slide in here around secure data sharing. And again, what's interesting here is that Snowflake, through their data sharing capabilities, makes it easy to share in a secure way. The two primary use cases that we've considered is for internal departmental analysts. So that's one we are running currently. And what's nice about this is it gives us the ability to give them more direct access to the fact tables that they need to do their research, but again, in a secure way, because we do have requirements to make sure that the client data is firewalled even within our company and between our respective client teams. And then in the future, we are thinking about how can we use data sharing as a mechanism to be able to make the data available to our client analysts. We want to finish proving this out internally, and then do a little more thinking and understanding with our clients of what their use cases, would be for that as well. So I'll just wrap up here, just kind of re-summarize the benefits. So, big things we accomplished with the EDP platform were the common, warehouse profiles around consumer, provider, and facility, which, is really the strategic data that makes the engine run. And then the flexibility that Jason described, and our ability to bring in data, transform it, and make it available for consumption. Being able to be that flexible, as Jason said, we can do two things. We can shorten the time to market. We can also be near real time. And with that near real time capabilities, both to update the campaigns, targeting, and then continue to get feedback, allows for our clients to be able to basically tune in their campaigns and achieve higher ROIs. Continue to talk about the high trust certified. We can do this in a highly secure way. And that gives us the trust and the respect that we need from our clients to be able to take accountability for their data, in what's a highly regulated industry. I think we'll just wrap there, unless Jason, did you want to add any final thoughts?
No, that's good. We can wait for some questions.
Okay. So Todd, I'll hand it back to you then if we want to do some Q&A.
Great. Yep. Yeah. So what I was going to do is, from a Snowflake perspective, what Healthgrades has done is something that's applicable across many of the what I'll call sub-verticals across healthcare and life sciences. I'm not going to read all this. It's on this slide, but you'll get it as part of the recording. But there's many, many use cases across all healthcare and life sciences. I'm just going to take 2 seconds on that, but I want to get to the questions. We've got quite a number of them. So give me 1 second here. So first one was, I've only seen the data directly from a flat file source. Does that mean that the extraction and the transformation has been performed outside of Snowflake and then loaded into Snowflake? So I guess, Brian or Jason, can you mention about, how much of what you do is ETL and how much is ELT? How much transformation do you do in Snowflake versus prior to loading into Snowflake? I believe is what the question is there.
Sure. So in truth, it's a little bit of both. One of the principles that we've decided upon for the kind of data platform that we're building, which needs to interact with a variety of different external systems as part of a customer stack in a kind of agnostic way, is that we take some steps to standardize and map data before it goes anywhere. So we push that left. And we say we want to be dealing through the majority of our pipeline with data that's pretty recognizable and that is not necessarily different from every source. However, that's usually a relatively lighter transformation. As I said, more of a mapping. There's also some validation happening there. And then we are, loading the standardized results into Snowflake. And then any more kind of, there's some other more, I would say, transformation or relayout or enrichment of data of joining multiple different types of data together that happen within Snowflake.
Great. And this next one, I'm going to kind of reorder the question just to kind of keep it easier. The question was, which edition of Snowflake are you using? It used to be known as Enterprise for Sensitive Data. It's now known as Business Critical. So the answer to that is Business Critical. The question was, are you using, they called it Snowflake Pipeline, but I think what we're talking about here is Snowpipe. Are you using Snowpipe, and were there any surprises with that feature?
Yeah, so we're using Snowpipe, have been for some time. We're just specifically using the Snowpipe REST API. So we effectively have our own event notifications coming off of S3 object storage, and we are using that to perform some routing based on which type of object that is, and then invoke Snowpipe to load that into Snowflake. We are also using the other side, the history part of the Snowpipe API, to gather metrics as we go that we expose in our time series metrics and dashboards internally. So we have near real-time metrics on data load volume. In terms of surprises, I don't think there's anything incredibly surprising there. We're kind of evaluating any of the updates or previews to Snowpipe as they go along, but the one that we're using has been stable for some time.
Yeah, it's been stable, and it's also helped a lot with logging and forensics, so it does a good job of keeping track of what's been ingested. So if we need to go back and do reconciliations or troubleshooting, it gives us, the usage and forensics detail we need to understand what was ingested.
Great. Simple one here. Are all of your applications and data sources cloud, or is some of it cloud, some of it on-prem? Basically, are you pure cloud or are you hybrid? That's what the question is here.
Yeah, great question. So for everything I talked about today, it is all cloud. However, I alluded to the fact we do have a legacy, and that is on-prem. So I wouldn't call it hybrid. We're single cloud. We made a decision to partner with Amazon. There's hasn't been drivers at this point to have to go hybrid cloud. We may decide later that becomes more important either for pricing or for redundancy, but we felt pretty good about the base of Amazon. And then, with Snowflake, basically they provide that level of SLA for availability. They do have some capabilities in terms of replication if you want to build more redundancy into replicating your data between regions and whatnot. We haven't chosen to do that at this point. But yeah, for everything we're talking about here, it's all cloud. And basically our goal, over the next 3 to 5 years is to move everything into the cloud and retire the legacy as we continue to grow our business and, move clients over. To be honest, it's not so much a technical challenge as it is sales and contracts. In healthcare, those are pretty onerous. And so, it takes a few months to basically work with the client, go over the new offering and then work through the migration.
Great. Here's a good one. How do you mask the patient's identity for privacy reasons? So what do you do from a data masking or in general a DID perspective?
Sure. So this is obviously use case specific, and not every person or every use case would have access to the same data. Our overall requirement is that any person or use case would have the minimum access to data required in order to do what they need to do. So there are some use cases where there are needs for specific people to have specific extracts of the raw data. There are other use cases where we really are only presenting aggregate data, right? So there's some aggregation happening, and there are a variety of technical means within Snowflake that we can use to allocate permissions to data along different dimensions. So I'll just mention a few things. So obviously there's table level permissions. Besides table level permissions, you saw a slide earlier about, and Brian talked about needing to give our analysts access to only the slice of data that they need, which we accomplish using secure views. So with our, this is our internal analyst team. Although they're internal, they get access only to certain slices of the data based on role-based access control. We do that by providing them with secure views where we are effectively filtering data based on what that particular role is allowed to see. The interesting thing there from a technical perspective is that we're actually able to construct the secure views in such a way that they inspect the user's role and can actually join that to some access control tables in order to determine what specific things that role is allowed to access within that view. This is something that we worked out with Snowflake and our security team, a little while ago now, and it was not terribly complex to actually implement once we had worked out the details of it, and it was a win with our security team.
Great. Simple question: do you ingest any XML? Obviously, you mentioned JSON, but are you doing ingesting any XML?
It's not the primary thing that we're doing. There's a little bit of there's a couple of small places where we do some XML processing, but it's not the bulk of what we do. The bulk of what we do from an outside ingestion perspective is JSON and CSV. There's a couple of other things, and then internally, largely it would be either JSON or Avro as it goes through our pipelines.
But as we mentioned, we have the capability, so we're not highly bound to a certain type. Our pipelines are flexible enough, and Snowflake's flexible enough to handle those different data structures. It's just XML isn't a common one for our clients and for the providers we work with.
Yep. And I appreciate the questions coming in. I'll try to get a few more. I know time-wise we're about 40 past, but you had mentioned data cleansing happening, quote, outside of Snowflake. I think it's what you said, and so the question was, if you're doing data cleansing outside of Snowflake, why? In other words, as I know, being the Snowflake guy, you can cleanse inside Snowflake. So if you're doing it outside, why did you choose outside in that case? That question makes sense.
Yeah. So there were a couple drivers beyond that. A lot of it just had to do with the way that we're organized as a software platform. So we're both a data platform and a software platform. We have a lot of external API based capabilities that we're building, and we wanted to be able to impose a certain level of standardization even at that layer, and then provide some validation of requests immediately as they're coming in. And then, as I mentioned, we also do plenty of things after the data lands in Snowflake and Stage as well.
Great. I'm going to rapid fire these really quick. If you can, do you shred the JSON or are you storing it in the variant data type? Variant data type is go ahead. You can answer. Yep.
So the initial load that we do using Snowpipe, we are loading JSON and Avro directly into variants. So our stage tables have variant columns. As the data proceeds past there, it depends. So for example, there is a place where we're building essentially a more typical dimensionalized model for a BI tool. There's no variance in that, just for ease of working with that specific tool. There are other places where we use the variance directly.
Yeah, I would say more on the analytics. We tend not to, because we normalize into facts and then dimensions and aggregations versus some of the consumption data and some of the other use cases for the API. It may vary.
Yeah, so great. One question here says, will you pass GDPR certification? From what I remember, you guys are not in Europe today. Is that correct? Or
we are. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. At this point, we're only U.S., so that's made our lives a little bit simpler.
Yeah. What I'll say from a Snowflake perspective for GDPR is what Snowflake enables, and we talk about data sharing and being able to aggregate, is that using, if you had an account in the U.S., an account in Europe, and you're able to sequester your European data and adhere to GDPR while at the same time taking aggregate and then sharing it back to the U.S. So this could be a 5-hour answer. There's a lot that goes into GDPR, but just know that we have clients that are absolutely using Snowflake and able to adhere to GDPR requirements. So one question, how do you query the data in Snowflake? I think it's a kind of maybe it's asking what tools. I think we saw Burst on there, but what's the different ways that you query the data in Snowflake? I don't know if they're asking tools or what have you, but if you want to take a stab at that one.
Yeah, I'll take the first pass. It's all SQL based. At the end, it works just like, the contract and the semantics are similar to every other, SQL database. In terms of tools, yeah, we've been on Burst. We're also working with Snowflake partners like Tableau. We use that internally, and we're starting to look at it for external use cases as well. And then, as Jason mentioned, we have streaming from Snowflake into other data stores like ES that we use then to optimize for API lookups and search. I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Yeah, that's pretty good coverage. So we've got people using the Snowflake console, like analysts using our secure views. We've got our BI tooling, and then we've got our own software components, which are largely using the Python and JavaScript connectors that Snowflake publishes.
Yeah, along those lines, there's a question, what ML and BI tools are integrated with Snowflake? What I would highly recommend there is go to our website, go to our online documentation. The list is way too long for me to list out here on this webinar, but know that there is a lot. It's a very, very large amount. All right, last one. How do you handle MDM, master data management?
So we primarily do that for our people in person data. I'll let Jason talk a little bit about the pipeline for that.
Yeah, so we have a couple of areas where we do MDM. We do it with the demographic-only person data, and we are doing that now for, we're doing that now with the same tool for provider data, so doctors as well. We do not apply that to any event data. Event data is separate from master data. And so we're using another tool to do that, and it's essentially part of our streaming pipeline on ingestion of that specific type of data.
Yeah, we use a third-party software as a service to help us with the standardization and mastering.
Great. So we're right at 45, just about 45 past the hour. So I think this is a great place to stop. If I didn't get to your question, I apologize. Try to hit the ones with variety as much as possible. But on behalf of Snowflake and Healthgrades, I want to thank everybody for taking the time today to listen to us, and look forward to future webinars in the future. So thank you all very much.